nature. Beautiful, serene, entrancing, captivating place. You sit in this lovely glen and enjoy the birds going by. Nothing could be better. Plants are often the most peaceful and calm of things. The green makes us feel relaxed. But there's a group of plants that kind of defy expectations of this kind of pacifist life. The carnivorous ones. There are some plants that tend to eat animals. They have evolved mechanisms to consume animals. Like this fly trap. Now, if you go on YouTube and you Google, carnivorous plants, you will see shit like this. Plants that eat animals. This is not a real picture. This is a Photoshop. This little monkey cannot be eaten by a Venus flytrap. The monkey is far too big. And you keep going and you'll see stuff that looks like this. Monkeys don't really get eaten by pitcher plants. It's not real, believe it or not. It's definitely, this is definitely photoshopped. And soon enough, you will see other images like this. Plants that eat animals. Some insects and humans might fall prey only in the world of Photoshop. So, today, we'll be talking about carnivorous plants. A fun topic. Green, peaceful, collecting light from the sun. Plants are the base level of our food systems and our ecosystems. They collect energy from the sun, and then they get eaten, and you go up this different trophic levels. So maybe there's an insect that eats a plant, and then a bird, like this vicious pigeon, consumes this kind of locust, a cricket, grasshopper, and that's kind of your standard food chain. But then it gets weird in the instances where you actually have some plants that will eat insects. We don't often see too many of these, but they do exist. And they exist in places where there might not be a lot of nutrients, so they have found alternative means of acquiring them. Now, it's a pretty labor-intensive, energy-intensive process. A carnivorous plant has to put a lot of energy into creating traps and then creating all the different things it needs to get the nutrients from the animal. So plants will not be carnivorous if they don't have to be. Carnivorous plants are pretty popular in media, though. Everybody knows piranha plant, and my favorite piranha plant is Petey Piranha, the big one from Super Mario Sunshine. So, yeah, piranha plants, they're little carnivorous plants. I mean, some of them are pretty big. Plants vs. Zombies has the Chomper. This one will eat a whole zombie and then chew it and digest it, and then it will eat another zombie. Little Shop of Horrors, Audrey 2. This is a popular carnivorous plant in musicals and in media. It sings, it basically dances, and it eats people. It needs blood, My favorite, though, representation is Team Rocket's James. James always had the carnivorous plant Pokemon. So he had Victory Bell and Carnivine, and they were always trying to eat him. I suppose he was tasty. But there are two carnivorous plant Pokemon, and James had both of them. Yeah. So, carnivorous plants are really fascinating, and they've fascinated people for hundreds of years because they defy expectations. People see grass, and they think it will grow and collect light from the sun, and that's it. But then when the things bite back, it's a little strange. People have been studying carnivorous plants for hundreds of years, even since, in European science since like the 1600s. But Darwin was quite enamored with plants that he called insectivorous. The plants that eat insects. Insectivorous plants. And he had been doing research on them for about 15 years, where he grew a bunch of them and did different experiments. And he was so fascinated with them. In 1875, he published a work, and it was translated into German the following year. And he created some of the foundational base knowledge that we still use today, and we're actually proving some of his hypotheses accurate quite recently, actually, and we'll talk about that throughout the presentation. So Darwin was enamored with these carnivorous plants so much, and by the end of this presentation, maybe you will be too. He has famously quoted in a letter, "I have cared more about Drosera than the origin of all the species of the world." Drosera is this little carnivorous plant, and Darwin said, "I care more about this little plant than anything else in the world." That tells you something. Lisa Goose, same. Yeah, so this is a fascinating thing. It's your favorite too, Kelp. Yeah, true. Yeah, Darwin was probably, saying, what the hell's going on? You can find letters from scientists and botanists and people writing back and forth, being like, this is the most unusual thing in the vegetable kingdom. It's a plant that closes or sticks insects. So Drosera rotundifolia, the round leaf Drosera. This was the primary species that Darwin utilized in his experiments. And so I'll summarize 4 of his key findings. So the first one was that he found that all the plants that were carnivorous grew in kind of acidic or nutrient-poor soils. So carnivorous plants have evolved where there's often heat. So there's like active plant material growing, peat moss and different things that absorb a bunch of nutrients, so then the rest of the soil doesn't have a lot of nutrients, and the only way to grow is by potentially being carnivorous. The soils are relatively acidic, meaning that they're kind of weathered or swampy or boggy. Boggy in particular might be the one we use, the word. They have sensitive glands that are particularly triggered by the presence of nitrogen or meat. And environmental factors didn't trigger the carnivory when there was active carnivory. So this plant he studied, Drosera rotundifolia, it has those little tendrils that will actually move and then cover and touch the prey. So he had put little pieces of meat and little pieces of phosphate of ammonia and different materials on it to see if it would do anything. And they were sensitive to presence of nitrogen and like living material, but wind and water, environmental things didn't trigger them. The digestion that occurs in carnivorous plants is a lot like the animal stomach. There's enzymes that digest. So enzymes are proteins that can break down other molecular things, like chitin, which is the exoskeleton of insects. It can break down proteins with proteases. They can break down nucleotides with nucleases. They can even remove phosphates with phosphatases. So they have all these different enzymes that break down tissue. And so here's a daddy longlegs or some type of arachnid or something being consumed by a flytrap. And the last one that I think was the most interesting when I was reading through all this was that some plants will actually consume seeds. So Darwin had put seeds on Drosera rotundifolia, and they would digest them because there's nutrients in seeds. So why not eat it? I eat oatmeal every day. I'll eat a seed or two. I have a whole bag of oatmeal. This is 25 pounds of seeds. Anyway, okay. Beautiful. Prue has a fun fact. Your fun fact is when Venus flytraps take bugs that are too big, it can keep the trap from sealing and lead to leaf rotting. Yes, I've had experience with that. I would put pill bugs or roly-polies in Venus flytraps for kids to see for demonstration because it's a big bug. Or it's not a bug, it's a little crustacean, but big animal that you can see, and then the thing would rot. Okay, so, Darwin is one of the first people to write a very long, robust thing about carnivorous plants, but he's not the only one. Yours truly wrote something called My Big Book of Evil Plants. And I was probably, 8 or 9. This is in 2004. And so I was really into them. A foundational text. Yeah, well, I just read the encyclopedias. I wrote about sundews. Sundews, they have different shapes. And I said, they're found all over the world. They can look different. When it catches something, it curls up and dissolves the poor bugs. The biggest is 18 inches. All carnivorous plants hate fertilizer. Well, that's Not necessarily true, but they're sensitive to ions. Butterworts. Butterworts, they grow all over the world. They have flat, flypaper-like leaves on the butterwort that get bugs stuck to leaves and they slowly dissolve. Here's a picture of what it looks like. Venus flytrap grow in very small parts of southeastern of the US of A. Small insects can get out of the Venus flytrap. Yeah. Cobra lilies. I remember drawing all these, and I was looking at the encyclopedia. Cobra lilies, they grow in California. The biggest is 18 inches. They're called cobra lilies because they look like cobras. When they go inside, they get stalked by little hairs and chemicals, then dissolve them. Pitchers. Okay. I did a lot of crazy writing. The pitcher plants. They grow up in tall trees and jungles. There are zillions of kinds of pitchers. What? The Raja pitcher is the biggest pitcher, and it grows at the top of the tallest mountains in Borneo. Its pitcher is as big as a football, and it can eat some squirrels. Well, it cannot really eat squirrels. I think that's exaggeration. I mean, even a baby squirrel could escape. The squirrels are quite big. So, I don't know how I got this idea. I think it's like a legend. I looked it up. I Googled to see, how did I think this? And I think people were just saying, they're so big they can eat a squirrel. That might have been like that southern way that southern people talk, I'm so hungry I could eat, the squirrel that lives in that tree right there. I don't know. They look like vases. And they work the same way a cobra lily eats its victims. Okay? There are some kinds of spiders and small tree frogs that live inside of them to eat insects as they come in. The spiders and frogs cling to the slippery walls. More about pitchers again. They eat all kinds of bugs, unlike the Venus flytrap. Pitcher. This pitcher looks a lot more like a pot than a vase. Sometimes the pitcher plants look strange. This one up here has the cover called the operculum that stays relatively closed at some points. True. The Savage Garden discusses some urban myths about Nepenthes taking larger mammal prey. Yeah, those are definitely myths in my understanding. Bladderwort. There are over 200 different kinds of bladderworts that grow in ponds and rivers. They're usually small with narrow leaves. They get stuck in water with their bladders, which is yellow and oozes chemicals to kill particulates that eats them. And I dedicated the book to the illustrator and the writer of this scholastic book about plants and kids, and my dad. It says, dedicated to Martin Jenkins and David Parkins and my dad for inspired me to write this book. What is that? They're very sweet. So, I'm inspired by my dad still. So that was the kid version. There was some information that was miscellaneous, is erroneous. There was some information in there that was, urban myth. So, we will be discussing all the genera of carnivorous plants today. But first, we're going to define what a carnivorous plant is. It has defined as having 5 features. 1, it captures prey in traps. So it might have a snap trap. It might have a pitfall trap where something falls straight down. It might have a lobster trap, which is where it has a bunch of hairs that go downward in one direction. So when something goes in, they can't get out because the hairs are in the way. They might have flypaper, sticky flypaper, where something gets stuck on it and then it gets dissolved. So then they kill the prey. Number 3 is they have to have enzymes to digest the captured prey. They have to have some types of enzymes to break down the, proteins and nucleotides and exoskeleton and all this. 4, they need to be able to absorb the nutrients. And 5, they have to use those nutrients to grow. So this is the definition that most people accept as a definition of carnivorous plants. If they don't do all of these, then it's not a carnivorous plant. Okay, so Darwin hypothesized that carnivory had convergently evolved, so it didn't just happen once. It happened 10 or more times. In one article I read said 12. but certainly at least 10. And carnivory occurs when there is a great need for nutrients. The plant is not going to spend so much energy evolving these strange mechanisms if there's nutrients in the soil. So, over the last 30 years, we're realizing that a lot of the things Darwin had said in like 1875 are accurate. In the 1960s, the people who were doing evolution of carnivorous plants were like, actually, they're all related. And then in the past 30 years, we're like, oh no, they're some of them are very distantly related. They just happen to look the same, but they're not related at all. And so we will be discussing all the genera of carnivorous plants that we currently know of that has research on them. There are many fascinating things about carnivorous plants. I will mention the things that are interesting to me, and surely there are tons of other bits and pieces about these plants that can awe and inspire. So let's proceed with the beginning, the group that we tend to love so dearly. At least we have a command in our chat for it. Droseraceae, the family that includes 3 genera of carnivorous plants. Firstly, the sundews, Drosera. The Droseraceae. Yeah, it's a family of carnivorous flying plants, also known as sundew family. Has 180 species and 3 extant genera, and the majority are in the genus Drosera. So this is our family of Drosera. All of the green indicates the regions in which they live. So you can see that it's prominent throughout the world, except Australia. It is one of the largest groups of carnivorous plants, with almost nearly 200 species. It's a little bit less, but it's quite massive. And they have many different forms. So in scientific denotation, if we're discussing like a genus, we'll just say, oh, everything here is about the genus Drosera, so we'll put D for Drosera, and then the specific epithet is ordensis. So Drosera ordensis looks like this thing from Mars. Looks like a strange alien thing, but these are all leaves. Someone says it looks kind of like a flower, but these are all leaves. There's no flowers here. The tips of the leaves have these sticky glands. They have trichomes, which are hairs, that create this mucilage that can catch and digest. This is our beloved Drosera capensis. This is, I have some Drosera capensis, and True told me, oh, this is the weed. This is the weed of the carnivorous plant world, and it has taken over my terrarium. It is covered, the whole thing. It's quite a weed, actually, but it's cute. It's serving. So these have flypaper traps. They're just sticky, and insects get stuck onto them. Sometimes the leaves will curl, and the trichomes will touch down. Some of them don't do that, but there are some species that will. Like this one. So this is Drosera capensis. Here's a 6-hour time lapse. So you can see how it moves. Isn't that fascinating? It's one of the more rapid moving Drosera. And you can see how wet these tips are. They look like little eyeballs. It's hugging it. Well, the hug of death. So sundews, fascinating little things. We can break them into 5 distinct groups. They are one of the biggest groups, so we'll break them down. I'm going to turn this off real quick. So the first group are called the temperate sundews. They have winter dormancy, and they turn into this little cluster of smaller condensed leaves that you see here in Drosera binata. And that little thing is called a hibernacula. So in the winter, it'll hibernate, basically, and it will grow again. There's also the tuberous ones. They tend to endure really dry summers and then grow in the fall. So here's a tuber, one of those. So they die back to the tuber and they regrow. They tend to be more hot places. Latifolia. Subtropical ones have year-round growth. I like these because, I don't know, they seem easier for me to do. I don't have to... If I were cultivating them, I'd want the one that just has year-round growth. This group is fascinating. The Petiolaris. There's a group that has these really prominent petioles with prominent trichomes on them. There are other defining features about it from a visual perspective, though. You can see that the petiole is this long stick that has the kind of flatter part at the end, and the trichomes are throughout. They all kind of look alien-like, yeah. And then this last group I learned about recently is the pygmy group. They're quite small, but one of the fascinating things about them is that they actually have abilities to reproduce asexually with things called gemma. So if you know liverworts, Marchantia produce little discs of cells that they can just become a whole new plant. And so the pygmy groups of sundews can do that too. So these little things can pop off and grow into a whole new plant. Pinguiculas can do this too, and we'll talk about that when we get there. Yeah. So, as True saying, Capensis is a year-round grower, so uh, it's constantly growing. I prefer the year-round growers, or like the subtropical kind. So the next group, I will be grouping everything by family, and then within the family, how closely related they are to each other. The most closely related thing to sundew is this one called the water wheel. The water wheel is this it's a little aquatic thing. Aldrovanda. Aldrovanda. The names are so fun. Aldrovanda has no roots. It's entirely in water. It's an entirely stem and leaf. And this thing has been called by many people, including Darwin, the aquatic Venus flytrap. At the end of the leaf is a little snap trap. It's just a little thing. It snaps. And it behaves just like Venus flytrap with the little triggering mechanisms. It eats, I mean, you can see how small it is, so it eats very small aquatic invertebrates. Like Dapnea and, little larvae of things. One of the things that's interesting is that this is one of the fastest moving plants in the world. The snap trap closes in 1/4 of a second. Underwater, that thing moves quicker than, I mean, not quicker than lightning, but, you get the point. Super quick. The next group, that's the last group in the Droseraceae, is our beloved Venus flytrap, sometimes called Venus's flytrap. Dionea. Dionea is a genus with only one species, Muscipula. There's only one species of Venus flytrap, but there's many cultivated varieties, so you might see different colors and shapes. They're strange, and they only live in this one tiny part of southeastern United States, in like North Carolina and South Carolina. Originally, this was the extent of their zone, but it's been diminished, and it's quite small now. Their native regions. Yeah. These flytraps are just leaves. So this whole thing is just one leaf that has a modified end. And inside the leaf, there's little hairs called trigger hairs. Typically, there's like 3 of these little hairs on the inside of the mouth. And if 2 of them are hit in quick enough succession, then it'll close. If movement continues, then the plant receives the stimulus to start clamping down and digesting. If it doesn't, then it's like, okay, maybe this is a false alarm. Now, these are so strange. How did we get something to evolve like this? Well, we'll see that in a second. But most people think, oh, it's a fly trap, so it eats flies. And in cartoons and stuff, you see that they show little cartoon flies landing in here and it eats it. But actually, less than 5% of its diet is actually from flying insects. And 30% of its diet is mostly ants in its naturalized habitat, or its native zone. And spiders is 30% too. So like 60% of its diet is ants and spiders. It doesn't really eat flies. So the strange plant, they have a dormancy period, so they will go down into a little bulbous thing. And some people who have Venus flytraps, like, oh, I had it for like a year and it died. Well, it might have been dormant, or they just gave it the wrong types of water. But Venus flytraps, how did we get something like this? Evolution of carnivorous plants is sometimes a mystery. It can be kind of unknown, but we do kind of know where the Venus flytrap came from. It probably came from the sundews. We have enough evolutionary history and record to see that Venus flytraps and sundews had a common ancestor that probably looked something like this on the left. there was some sensitive tissue at the end of a leaf that can digest, uh, you know, insects, and then eventually you get something that changes and becomes like this. So this is a good example. This is an active sundew, but its ancestor probably, we don't have we don't have that plant anymore. Okay, next family, Nepenthaceae. The Nepenthaceae. We love Victory Bell. So the Nepenthaceae are these pitcher plants. Specifically, if we want to use an appropriate common name, we can call them tropical pitcher plants. So Nepenthes is the genus, and they're from Southeast Asia, northern Australia, a little tiny bit, and Madagascar and Sri Lanka. And they have some fascinating little tiny populations in other places. But these plants are remarkable. This is one leaf. This whole thing is one leaf. Imagine evolving to become one leaf like this. They are an example of a pitfall trap. They just sit there. They create some type of nectar near the rim of the leaf, or on the very top, the lid. And then something tries to come in, and then it slips because it's slippery, and it falls into this liquid it produces that is a viscoelastic biopolymer. Basically, it's just this really gooey, thick kind of liquid that it makes in its pitcher that makes it hard for things to escape, especially flying insects. And so people hybridize them a lot and make cultivated varieties. And so here on the left is like a wild type Nepenthes mirabilis, but on the right you can see that it's like a hybrid. It's been crossed a lot, and it might as well be a wild type, but it's a mix between a bunch of different things. Now the pitfall traps, things go in looking for sugar, and they smell some nectar, and they slide in. They get stuck in this kind of thick liquid it produces. The liquid also has enzymes to digest, and then it absorbs through here. It is a waxy wall, so things can't really get out, and then this lip makes it hard for them to climb out of that. This is a hyper-specialized structure. It is crazy. This is what the whole plant might look like. You can see that this is like a cultivated type of hybrid. But you can see that it has the flat blade of the leaf here for like photosynthesis, and then the carnivorous part at the very end. For example, this is Wikimedia has great illustrations and diagrams. The peristome is the name of the kind of mouth or the lips of the pitcher, and the top is called the operculum, the little lid. The lid of the tropical pitcher plants often helps to keep excess rain out because it has its own kind of liquid it produces and doesn't want to overflow, because it is a pitfall trap. Because it just wants things to fall in, and because it's so far down, they can't escape. But if it were filled with water, something could potentially swim out. They're just waxy walls, so they don't have hairs to push things down. Additionally, they'll produce sugar on the operculum or the lid, or maybe underneath the peristome, and it'll be appealing. And things will want to come and have a lick. I would. The design is genius. That's the power of evolution, baby. So look at this one. Now, sometimes they end up evolving unique relationships. There are at least 3 species that end up being defecation consumers. Now, this is Nepenthes lowii. There's 2 others that have reported to do this. Their lid produces, sugar, and animals will want to come and lick it. At the end, the animals will then poop, and they will just digest the poop. Now, like I was reading, 15% of their diet still is insects that happen to fall in, but they're trying to get that true defecation. They look cute too. They look like they could be a little mouth, like Victory Bell, They're charming. They need high humidity though. Okay, the next one, Cephalotaceae. There's only one species. There's only one species of in the family, Cephalotaceae. You know what it is? It's Cephalotus follicularis. It's from Western Australia. Now, this thing is tiny. This thing is hard to grow. This thing turns more red when it gets more light, and it turns more green when it's in the shade. They are pitfall traps, but they also have, and the peristome, the mouth, it has these ribs that are quite curved. and the curve actually keeps things from like getting out. So they go in and they fall in, and then they are kind of like a lobster trap because things can't get out. Of course, it's from Australia. So hobbyists go nuts for cephalotus. You said true. Yeah, they seem quite lovely. They seem harder to grow than a lot of other, carnivorous plants. A lot of people think Audrey too looks like a Venus flytrap, but if you look at the peristome with these ribs, this looks like the tooth. This looks more like Audrey to me. So maybe Audrey too from Little Shop of Horrors is a cephalotus. Tiny little plant, by the way. You know, this thing is more closely related to oxalis or wood sorrel than anything else. So you would think, oh, all the pitcher plants might just be related to each other, just look a little different. No, this is not even the same order as some of the other ones. Like evolutionarily, they're quite different from other plants. So this is its closest relative, functionally. Saracinaceae, okay. Our beloved Saracinaceae. I know people have been waiting for this. True has been sharing Saracinaceae, or Sarracenias, in our Discord, and they're blooming, and they look like alien plants, and they're so strange. Well, here we go. The Sarracinaceae has several different genera of carnivorous plants, including Sarracenia. There are many species. These are what I would call lobster pot traps. They're pitfall and lobster traps. So things fall in, but they also have hairs on the inside of this leaf that pushes things down so that if they're in there, they can't get out. They have a pretty big range, southeastern United States, even into Canada, some of these different species. There's Purpurea, which is the purple pitcher plant, Flava, which is the yellow pitcher plant, and Leucophylla, which is the white. I really like the patterning and the venation here. This one is quite small, but it is cold hardy. It is cold hardy, and it can grow in Ontario. Now, these are crazy plants. A lot of people are fascinated by pitcher plants, or carnivorous plants in general. So there's a lot of research on them, and the eastern newt is apparently falling prey to Sarracenia quite often. So in 2019, they were evaluating all the Purpurea, the Sarracenia purpurea in Ontario to see what was inside. And 20% of them had these little baby newts. And it can take 3 to 13 days for these newts to digest, apparently. And the way that they die is once they fall in, they can't really climb out. But they die because they get too hot. So the researchers are like, yeah, there's not like an acid, it's not like they're dying of hunger. They basically get cooked. That's what they were saying. But, plants got to eat. This one is a particularly interesting one to me. This is the northern purple trumpet pitcher, which is that Purpurea we saw. It has it is quite a large range, and it's quite cold tolerant. In this photo, there's even like snow at the base of it. Now, I think this looks more red than purple, but that's okay. True says, Purpurea actually hosts a complex microbiome in the pitchers. Yes. So, there are a lot of different pitcher plants, from Nepenthes to Sarracenia, have like infauna, or animals that live inside, or creatures that live inside, like microbiome. These fill with rainwater and don't create their digestive enzymes, so they need little bacteria to help them. Yeah. So here is an image, essentially one of the first images from 1601 of this plant. And this was all published in Latin. But it's crazy to think that people have been aware of this species for hundreds of years. I mean, I think it's weird for me to think that, like, some European person knew about this in 1601. Lily, the cobra lily. Now, I had this as a kid. This was one of the first carnivorous plants I actually had as a kid. They had this at like Home Depot, and they're from Oregon and Northern California, and they look like a cobra with this little structure of the leaf coming out here. I was always told that there's a hole right here, and things go in, trying to get nectar, and then they go down here and they slide, and there's hairs on the inside that keep them from coming out. They look big. They're actually not. They're like this big. They're quite small. One of the things that they said is like, oh, it has these kind of pockets where light can go through, so that insects think that they can escape. They try and get out, but they can't. I was like, okay, well, I think that, is interesting. It's probably that the light in there makes it feel like the insect is still safe, But they're an unusual group. This is Darlingtonia californica. It's the only species in the genus. But Darlingtonia has a pretty extensive roots for a carnivorous plant. Carnivorous plants don't really need roots. They don't really need roots because they're getting their nutrients from eating things. Now, the roots might be there for other reasons. So Darlingtonia is hypothesized to have extensive roots to help it persist through environmental disasters like fires. So one of the big things is that this area might be prone to fires, and so it can regrow from some of the root tissue. If you look at the other carnivorous plants, they have a very highly reduced, barely any roots, or 0 roots. We're going to see some that have 0 roots. It's all leaf. That's it. And we already have seen one. The water wheel has only leaf tissue and stem. And so it's weird that this plant has so much of the root. And it is actually quite robust. It has a quite notable, like, outer skin. People have been postulating why this is. Other Sarracenia do have notable roots as well. So Queen Louie has a question. So do these plants still photosynthesize? If they eat things, they do. So the eating of things is for their nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus. But they still need sugars. So they make their body out of sugar, which they get from the air, which comes from CO2. So photosynthesis takes CO2 from the air, and then they take the light, and then they make sugar, and those sugars are used to build the cells and to build the plant, but then they need to make proteins, which they get from nutrients that they get from eating. It's a great question. Yeah. So the next group is a fun one. A lot of people call these the sun pitcher plants. The genus is Heliamphora, and people think it's like Helios. Helios amphora. That's what they think it's from, but it's from the word marsh. And amphora is the kind of vessel for storing water, like the Greek amphora. So this means marsh amphora. So it's the marsh pitcher plant. And there's a couple, there's several species, but they tend to be from northern South America, specifically in this region, like on top of these rocky structures that are revered by indigenous people. There's kind of highland versions and lowland versions. These plants are notably hard to grow. I have never grown one. I've never seen them at the store. You probably have to get them from someone who really is a collector. But they need really particular conditions. And there's the whole genus, you can't treat them the same. They're unusual for a host of reasons. One is that the rain fills inside. The rain fills inside the pitcher. And they have these really tiny operculums. So the little thing on top, the operculum, they call this a spoon sometimes. It'll have nectaries, so maybe sugar. And the idea is that this fills with rainwater, and then something comes and licks it, and they fall in, and then they dissolve, and they get consumed. But yeah, they're fully exposed. Yeah. Okay, into the strangest ones. To me, these are the weirdest. Okay, let's try saying this right. Lentiburliaceae. That's a mouthful, isn't it? Now, I think this might be my favorite after putting all this together. You might know the pinguiculas, the butterworts. People who are really big in the carnivorous plants call them pings, but I like to say pinguicula. Pinguicula, these are the butterworts. They're kind of rosette, flat plants that have flypaper leaves, and you can see that they have this kind of dead tissue on them. The thing that's weird to me, okay, it's not weird. I'm just saying personally, there's a few things for me that are hard about this plant. One, it's always light green. A lot of them are light green, so they look like sick to me. Two, the insects and creatures on the leaves will stay there. You will see the whole plant is going to be like covered in like bits of dead tissue. That's just fine. I mean, sometimes they can come off a little bit, but they might just be there forever. Once something dies on that leaf tissue, the glands and the enzymes that are right there that activate it were not going to never work again because they're like one and done. So they use the little section of enzymes there once and that's it. They're like the sundews. If you look at their structure, they're just like the sundews, except they only have the little sticky stuff on one side, and the stalks are really small. So something gets stuck, and then these glands will produce the enzyme to digest the insects. There's many different species, and notably there are some that change form. Heterophilous. So here's an example. So some pinguiculas are tropical, some are temperate, but there are both temperate and tropical ones that will change depending on the season. So some of them, in the winter, they will become kind of tight rosettes of kind of succulent green leaves that are not carnivorous. And then they will, get their summer bod ready, and they'll get ready to eat and feast. They'll be summer carnivores. So if you're getting a pinguicula, you should look up if it's temperate or tropical, and if it has multiple season stages. Bladderworts. Look at this thing. This is the bladderwort. Utricularia. I think it's invasive in Florida, but it's found in water, as you might guess, based on this photo. It has probably the most complex plant traps of anything, and they're bladder traps. Yeah, people cultivate them because they're pretty. They think the flowers look kind of like orchids, so people like them. You can see in this field, they have these tissue that sticks out with all the little like leaves and traps, and then the flowers stick up. So people cultivate them because they're pretty. Yeah, these are carnivorous, indeed, but they prey upon the tiniest of aquatic invertebrates and protozoa. So the people who have studied these plants will say that this is a crazy mechanism. The way that this works, and I'll just summarize it in a very brief way. These bladders are microscopic. I mean, they're not. Some of them are quite big, but they're relatively small. This little thing is a Dapnea, which is like a water fairy or water flea. A little tiny thing, a few millimeters. What happens is the plant will actively pump its bladders out, the water out of the bladder through like active transport, and then it will sit in this like resting stage. It'll have these little hairs that are like levers. So this is like a perfect equilibrium state where if something is touched, it will pop back open. So the plant actively transports ions to move water so that it can like set up the trap. If something touches a lever, then it opens this hole and it pops open, and then all the water around and presumably the little organism will be sucked inside. This is a bladder trap, and this is probably the most complex way that a plant captures animals. And then it will digest them in here. It's crazy. Their range, yeah, they're aquatic, so they can be, anywhere there's water that they can survive in. And they get their nutrients from eating animals, so they don't even need, like, nutrients in the water. There are some terrestrial varieties, too, yeah. So there'll be some that will eat little soil microbiota, or soil, even macroflora, or macrofauna and stuff. But this one is quite weird. It has no roots, but these things look like roots, but these are just leaves. They're trap leaves. So there's the photosynthetic chlorophyll-filled leaves on the top, and then it will make these other leaves. They function kind of like roots, but they're not necessarily. But they might be underground, and they are going to help get nutrients. They are lobster pot traps. So in this little diagram, you can see these little tiny hairs in the middle. Those little hairs are what keeps things from getting out. This one is the corkscrew plant, Genlesia. Genlesia in this particular species is Violacea because the flower looks like a violet. Darwin thought this plant was carnivorous. He's like, this was like 1870. He wrote down, I think this plant's carnivorous. And we didn't have any data suggesting it was carnivorous until 1998. And that's crazy to think. 100, I mean, to me, it's remarkable. So things, little tiny organisms enter, they get stuck, and then they probably, we don't know fully, but they probably die because there's no oxygen. So one of the hypotheses is that inside of these underground trap leaves, little organisms die and then they get digested because there's not a lot of oxygen. And the reason they think that's true is because there's anaerobic bacteria that only really grow where there's no oxygen. So, strange things. Okay, Bilibidaceae. Say that 12 times fast. Bilibidaceae, 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 Bilibidaceae. Okay, it's called the rainbow plant. And it's called the rainbow plant because it has the little dewy trichomes, and when the sun hits it, it looks like it's shining like the rainbow. This looks like a sundew, but it is not related to a sundew at all. This is just another convergent evolution. Another example of strange look-alike situation. There's two different distinct groups. There's like, other things. There's Linifolia group and then like the Gigantea group. But you can see that this one is kind of scraggly, so that whoever is growing this has staked it. The genus Bilibis is named after the Greek myth character Bilibis, who fell in love with her twin brother. And because they couldn't be together, she cried. She cried so much. And the idea is that all the little droplets of sticky mucilage on the leaves are, reminiscent of the tears of Bibulus. Yeah. So the thing that we're realizing about carnivorous plants is that we said there's 5 things they have to do. Kill, the trap, kill, digest, absorb, and grow. Those are the 5 things that makes a carnivorous plant. Well, it's only in recent decades are we getting sufficient data to show us that some of these plants are doing all of them. So like, we didn't think this plant had any enzymes to break down things. We thought it had a fungus that helped break down insects. But in 2005, they had data saying it does make enzymes, so it's a true carnivore. Yeah, crazy. Okay, Drosophilacea. There's only one species in this one. Drosophilum lusitanicum, called the dewy pine, also called the Portuguese sundew. It's in Western Europe and the Western Mediterranean, in Morocco and Spain, but prominently apparently in Portugal. And so this plant has leaves that looks just like a sundew. It's not related to sundew at all. It is just convergent evolution. Even the flower stem has the little trichomes on it. You can see here they're quite thick and dewy. Do they eat Drosophila? Maybe. You tell me. Are these Drosophila? I think the baby plant is quite cute. These are the 2 first leaves that come out, and it just looks like a little cutie. Okay, Dioncophalaceae. This one is a very, very rare plant from West Africa. It doesn't have a common name. It might have a native name, indigenous name, that won't be any easier for me to say than Triphyophyllum. Triphyophyllum peltatum is the scientific name of this one. And what it does is it has the name Triphyophyllum, so 3. Why is 3 in there? Well, it has 3 leaf shapes. The first leaf shape is this like kind of strap-like leaf as a juvenile. As a juvenile, it has a strap-like leaf, and then once it hits adult, like sexual maturity, it produces leaves that have hooked tips. So this is a liana type plant in the tropical rainforest. It grows up, and it just grows and grows and grows. It uses the tips of these leaves to cling on to things. But what is the third leaf shape? the third leaf shape is the carnivore leaf. So it's called a facultative carnivore. It doesn't have to be, but when it has low phosphorus, it will start making carnivorous leaves. And they look just like a sundew and just like the dewy pine. They look just like all the other ones. Here we can see it has two of them coming up. This thing is crazy though, because it can be quite long. It's like a liana, so it can grow as like a long vining thing, up to 60 meters or 200 feet. So it's considered the largest carnivorous plant. Now it might not have, giant leaves that are carnivorous like this, but yeah, it is very rare. It is very rare. So in the comments, we are seeing a lot of things that look like sundew. It is very reasonable that all the carnivorous plants initially began as flypaper traps and then might have evolved into different things. So everything might begin as a flypaper trap that looks like a sundew or pinguicula or drosera, and then it goes from there. So this is another example of convergent evolution. The powers of science. Okay, the last family is an interesting one. This is the Bromeliaceae, the bromeliad family. There is a genus called Brochinia, and there are hypothesized to be like 2 to 3 species, these are the 3, that are carnivorous. And the idea is that they're pitfall traps, so things fall inside and then they get dissolved and digested. They all tend to be from like Venezuela and northern, South America. Reducta in the wild is like straight up a tube, but when you cultivate it outside of its native habitat, it ends up being more spread out. And I think that might be the case with Hectoides here, and then here's Tatii. Now, it is hypothesized that they have some potential enzymes to break down whatever they capture. If not, then they have bacteria that lives inside of them that breaks down the different animals they capture, and then they can absorb from there. They have waxy leaves, so you can see this kind of bluish hue. It's waxy, so things that come in, they'll slide on in and they're stuck. Especially this that's straight up a tube. Okay, the last one here is called the lantern of the forest. Catopsis bertoniona. Wow. Catopsis bertoniana. Oh well. So this one is just like the others, except the research currently does not show that it has any enzymes to break down prey. So it might be relying on bacteria. It's also bromeliad. So what do we call it when they might not have enzymes? Well, carnivorous plants in our definition need to have these 5 things. That lantern of the forest cannot digest the captured prey. So we can call it a proto-carnivorous plant. So a proto-carnivorous plant is a plant that can do some of these things, but not all of them. So typically, they can capture prey in traps, they can kill captured prey. The big thing might be they might not have enzymes that actively digest the prey. So they might end up having to work with bacteria, even in some cases fungus. But then they can usually absorb and then use them to grow. So there is another prominent example of a proto-carnivorous plant that looks like it should be carnivorous. This is the dew stick from South Africa, Rorigula. There's 2 species, I believe, of Rorigula, and it's called the dew stick because its leaves have this kind of wet dew on them that acts just like a sundew, but it doesn't have enzymes. So what it does is it has this beneficial mutualistic association with these little jumping tree bugs, and the jumping tree. So it'll capture insects with its sticky dew, and jumping tree bugs emit some kind of like, I believe it's like an oil. They put some type of coating on their legs so they don't get stuck and they walk around, and then they eat the insects that are captured, and then they go pooping. And so the dew stick, the Rorigula, will absorb the nutrients from the poop. Born to be a sundew, forced to be a dew stick. So apparently, folks in South Africa would grab this plant and use it to catch flies, the dew stick. You might know these other ones. These are protocarnivorous plants that also have some type of, a little bit of a sticky mucilage. Now, Plumbago zeylanica, I believe this one's in Hawaii. And then Passiflora botida. The calyx here, the sepals, have these little protrusions that look just like sundews, and they have tiny little bits of droplets that can get things stuck. And then here, the Passiflora, the calyx as well. So these are both calyces. They have little sticky droplets. So they could potentially get things stuck. Like there's a little stuck insect right there, but it doesn't really digest them and doesn't really absorb them. So what is it doing? Who knows? I mean, it doesn't, I don't think it knows what it's doing. It just is. So if you want to grow your own, how do you grow your own carnivorous plants? I'll tell you 5 little tricks. 1, most of them, pretty much all of them, are going to want distilled water. They're really sensitive to ions. So, you know, tap water has different dissolved minerals in it. The carnivorous plants can be sensitive to that. And if you give your Venus flytrap tap water, sure enough, it will die. So distilled water. 2, you need to make sure you know the plant and have appropriate media. So some of the plants prefer to have a mixture of like perlite and peat moss, or a mixture of peat moss and, you know, granitic sand. And so understanding the particular plant you're growing and its native habitat and how it grows naturally will be useful to create or purchase an appropriate media. Understanding if it's temperate or tropical is a really big one. This was something that happened to me. I mixed temperate and tropical carnivorous plants in like a terrarium. So my temperate plants can't really undergo proper hibernation with their hibernacula. And so apparently over the course of a couple years, you know, because they can't follow their normal cycle of, you know, hibernation and rest, they might kind of just fizzle out. So make sure that you know if it's tropical or temperate and its normal cycles that it needs. Make sure you understand the light requirements. A lot of them will like full light, some of them will like shade. Make sure you understand that. But the biggest thing is really just understand each species. So even within a genus, so let's say we're looking at the marsh pitcher plants. Well, even within that genus, some of the plants might want completely different conditions. So understanding the species is more important than understanding the genus or the family. So just because one pitcher plant likes something doesn't mean they all like it. Yeah. True says, also if you're growing outdoors, keep your local environment in mind. Trying to grow bog plants in Arizona, well, yeah, a lot of them were like high humidity. So there's a lot of things to consider. All right. Well, exciting stuff. Well, thank you everyone for coming to the presentation. I really appreciate it. Carnivorous plants are a really fun topic for me. I've liked them since I was a little kid, and so the opportunity to talk about them is quite a delight. What is that? Do you hear that?
We are the carnivores and bugs should be afraid. We break both down the living and decayed.
Their enzymes act from outer shell to the inside, digesting chitin proteins and nucleotides.
We are the carnivores, we capture, kill, digest. Then we absorb and grow to be our best. Our native lands are so nutrient deprived that we've resorted to capturing dead or alive. Sometimes we even eat some rodent poop. It gets mixed into a shitty little soup. Just give something sweet and they will take a seat, and soon there comes a tasty little treat. So yummy, yum, yum.
Fun.